For now, in all the shurim that I give on the tape, on the CD here, should all be in the name of my son who passed away, Zev David ben Shimon Halevi. They should all be in the schus, and there should be megan on for him in terms of all the dinim. We should be zocher to see the Geula Shlema in the near future. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
Well, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to speak about the concept of the Rabbanu Shem's Rachmanos, but my real intention is to explain what's going on in current events, because there seems to be something radical happening that never really happened before, both in America and in Israel. Everything is turned to the left. In America, we have like a different country. We have two groups of people who are somewhat at political war with each other, the Democrats and the radical left and the Republicans, and they can barely abide by each other. So America is in serious danger of perhaps collapsing in some way, because we have two subspecies that are not talking to each other really. And also in Eretz Yisrael, for the first time, a government that's been chosen, or it's supposed to come into effect this Sunday, today. So I don't know if it came into effect yet. I don't know. I didn't listen to it yet. But there's a possibility that the government will be the one that's appointed to govern Eretz Yisrael. And this government is a leftist government. It's composed by Lapid and so on, the Meretz and Labor and all the parties, so on. And it's a very anti-religious government. And the only positive thing about this government is that it contains Bennett, Naftali Bennett, and it contains Gideon Sa'ar, who are both basically from people. But there's a serious problem in the sense that even though Bennett will be prime minister and Gideon Sa'ar the minister of justice, the serious problem is that you have many people, especially Lieberman, who's minister of finance in this government, who says that he's going to take away all the money from the Charedim, and so on. So this is a very dangerous thing. And in 2 years, Bennett will be prime minister for 2 years, and then Lapid becomes prime minister. And I suspect in 2 years, all hell will break loose. And Israel will go back to becoming a totally non-religious country. They will cancel all the whole category of Shabbos. They will allow all stores to be open on Shabbos. That will in effect cancel the Shmir Shabbos of Israel itself. They will confiscate most of the funding for the Fruma. They will draft a lot of the Fruma and so on and so forth. And even though I somewhat disagree with the Fruma on certain areas, but it will be catastrophic. They will probably give over the temple, the Beis Hamikdash, the Western Wall, to allow women to come in, and they probably will recognize Reform conservative Jews to become a legitimate rabbinical assembly in Israel. So we're looking at the complete reversal of spirituality in Israel as it has been manifest for 70 years. So this is really a shocking incident. And the fact that the radical left and the radical left in America and in Israel have taken over the whole government leaves Orthodox Jews in a very big bind of where are they exactly represented and so on. So such a thing has never happened concurrently between these two governments, and all Jews who are religious and so on and so forth are in deep trouble. So the question really is, of course, it's not so much the question about what the politicians are doing in Israel. That's absolutely irrelevant. It's what is God doing? Why is God allowing this to happen? And so on, because this seems to be the worst of all the durus. Then it seems to be a situation when we're very distant from the Geula, from the redemption and the Mashiach. So instead of following the Trump administration and getting closer to the Gula, the redemption, because you have to remember Trump gave Jerusalem back to the Jews. He gave the Golan Heights, and he was about to give back large portions of the West Bank and so on. I mean, Trump did a great deal for Israel, more for Israel than any other president. And suddenly the whole thing turned around 180 degrees, and Trump was, of course, removed by what he claims is, and which is probably true, an election fraud. And Biden and the left have completely the progressives have completely taken over fundamentally the government. So the question is, what's going on here? It seems to be everything was moving in a certain direction, and suddenly that whole direction has been turned 180 degrees to be the lowest position of Klal Yisrael in many, many years. So I'd like to explain what I think the Rabbi Hashem is doing. By going into a little deeper, I will be repeating myself somewhat. I think you've heard some of the past things I've said, but the fundamental chiddush of the whole shir, I don't think I've ever explained in such a detailed way. So I'm going to review the whole process of Chesed, Din, and Rachamim and show where this is moving. I'm going to show, in a certain sense, the sojourn, the journey of Chesed, Din, and Rachamim, and how the Rebbe moves to these attributes and determines what the hashgacha is in the world and so on. When God created the world, He fundamentally created the world with three attributes. An attribute called Chesed, called Din, and an attribute called Rachamim. And we want to know exactly what exactly is the definition of these three. What do these three mean? So we're going to speak about them and first define, in some extent, their operational features. And then we will look at these three features as they will manifest somewhat in history. And then we're going to look and see what the mechanics are of these three spiritually. And we're going to go into some very deep concepts and so on. And then finally, once we have a clear understanding of that, we are then going to apply it to the current events that's happening in the world today and try and understand what God is doing. First of all, the concept of chesed means loving kindness. And chesed means, really, basically, that God wants to create another, known as Zulosai, and He wants to give him a chelek, a portion, in the world to come in Olam Haba. Now, technically speaking, Chesed is an attribute of God, simply in terms of God's desire to give a great ecstatic experience to the Zulosai, which is the person who will receive Olam Haba. And that's it. It's unconditional. That means that if you love someone, you will do something unconditionally for him. Like a mother, when she takes care of an infant, she doesn't expect anything in return. Yet she commits herself, she commits basically her life to bringing up this infant. So anything really based on love is unconditional. It doesn't demand anything from the recipient of that love to give back in return. God is giving, therefore, the eventuality or the actuality of Olam Haba, a future world, which is fundamentally a world which lasts forever. There's no time or space in that world. It's a world that goes on forever, and so on. And the fundamental state of the Zulasa in Olam Haba is one of ecstatic experience, and so on. So this is what this is, and so on. And according to the attribute of Chesed, this will be given to the Zulasa, to the recipient, without doing anything to earn it. So Chesed, the definition of Chesed is unconditional giving, unconditional love. But there was a certain problem with this thing, and that was the concept of din, justice. Justice claimed that the Zulosai has a major problem. And that problem is that the Zulosai because it is an entity of self-awareness, considers itself to be outside of God, because its ability to say me as an act of self-awareness is really an ability to see himself as a separate and independent entity from God. And therefore, the way he sees God is that he sees himself, because of the me, outside of God. And who is God? God therefore becomes an entity who he sees outside of him. So God is part of the world of other, the world outside of God. God is an outside in respect to the Zulasai. So this is a problem for the Zulasai, because the Zulasai does not have a sense of unity with God. He sees God as a separate entity outside of himself and is in the world of not me. The Zulasai has two senses in his awareness, the sense of me, or himself, and the sense of not me, that which is outside of me and which is not me. But that duality, which is inborn in the Zulasai, betrays the feeling of absolute unity, that God is actually him. It says, Einoi Morvadoi, that there is nothing else but God. So that means that the Zulasai and his ability to be self-aware is really a part of God. He borrows in a certain sense, or at least operates in a certain sense, from the awareness of God. And that's the awareness of Atzmusai and so on and so forth. Or in another way, we call God on a lower level, a different version, the Ein Sof. But the problem that the Zulasai sees God as outside of him and as separate with him, as a duality, is a compromise on his ability to feel unified with God. And this causes a certain sense of disempowerment for the Zulasai. He does not feel powerful because of his self-awareness, but actually he feels disempowered. So fundamentally, the attribute of justice, the attribute of din, says to God, well, we really can't give him Olam Haba, because if we allow him to be in a state of mind where he sees God as outside of him, because he has a sense of me and a sense of not me. So therefore, he will, in a certain sense, compromise on his ability to enjoy Olam Haba. So therefore, we have to fix this. The person has to earn Olam Haba and go to a completely healthy state, so that he recognizes that God is him, that there is nothing outside of God. And in that sense, the Zulasai will become re-empowered. In this sense, he will consider himself as a unified entity with God and be able to be Zocha, be able to be worthy of Olam Haba. Because the entity, the Zulasai, is an entity which has a self-awareness, it feels a sense of me. It also feels a sense of not me. And the unity with God is betrayed. And therefore the Zulasai feels disempowered, because he's really outside of God, and he represents a duality with God. So that's the attribute of justice says this has to be fixed. So the attribute of justice lays down the rule that he cannot go to Olam Haba unless he earns it. And what does it mean to me that he earns it? It doesn't mean that he has to do something for it arbitrarily, but it means that he has to correct this problem, which is called in Hebrew, or in Aramaic, Nam Neksufa, bread of shame. Because he feels disempowered, because he sees himself and God as a duality and does not recognize the special unity between the two. So therefore, the attribute of justice claims that he has to fix this, and only after fixing this can he enjoy the level of Olam Haba, which is eternal. So therefore, we have two different attributes. We have the attribute of Chesed, which is an attribute of love, and wants to give Olam Haba, the future world, to the Zulasai, unconditionally, without doing anything. And then we also have the attribute of justice, which says he has to fix the problem of Namak Sufa, which is called the bread of shame, or else there will be compromise. So the attribute of justice says that Olam Haba has to be earned conditionally. He just can't get Olam Haba just like this. He has to earn it in some way by rectifying this problem of the duality that the Zolosai perceives between him and God. So we have two midas that are fundamentally contradictory. Chesed is a midah which claims unconditional love and therefore unconditional giving of olam haba. Din, which is justice, claims conditionality, that the man has to do something to earn olam haba, or else he will not be able to enjoy the full status of his being when he's in olam haba. So these two attributes are really in contradiction. So what happens is this is a very difficult problem in a certain sense, kavayochol, for God. How do I reconcile these two attributes? Why? Because the midas hachesed, which is the midah of love, is based on is a midah of unconditional love. Is based on the concept of love itself. That is based on love. But the midas hadin is not based on love. It's based on truth. It's based on the fact on emes. It's based on the fact that the Zolosai has to earn a rectification of this problem called Nam Sufa and then go to Olam Haba. So one is dominated by the attribute of love, and the other one is dominated. Chesed is dominated. Love and kindness is dominated by love, and Din is dominated by truth. Which one is the greater of the two? You know, it's in a conflict between Chesed and Din. It is clear that Din wins because God is ultimately the God of truth. Hashem Elokechem Emes. God is the total representation of the attribute of truth. And the attribute of truth is what dominates this physical world, which was created so that man can develop a unity with God and not see himself as outside. So we have to analyze the concept of din, truth. So what does truth do in certain senses? Truth says very simply, if you are able to rectify the problem of Nam Sufa, then you get Olam Haba, because you have corrected the flaw in the sense that you see a duality between you and God. But what happens if you don't? What happens if the Zolosai is unable or unwilling to rectify the flaw of Nam Sufa, where he sees himself outside of God, and therefore God and him are a duality? What happens then? Well, the attribute of justice says very simply, since you have not corrected the problem of Nam Sufa, you go back to where you were originally. And where was the Zolosai originally? The Zolosai was a part of God. He was contained in God in a certain sense, and he was a part of God, and he was not a separate entity. And since the Zolosai does not correct the problem of Nam Sufa, the Zolosai will go out of existence. How? By re-entering into God himself, by becoming a part of God himself, a chelek elakami mal, a portion of God himself, and therefore his consciousness will be removed. He will no longer be a separate entity outside of God, but his self-awareness will be totally cancelled, and he will become part of God himself. So therefore, the midas hadin, the attribute of justice, sees two alternatives. If he rectifies the problem of Nam Sufa, he will be able to obtain Olam Haba, because he will reunify with God as a separate entity, and he will do this through the act of love. When a person does the mitzvahs in the act of loving God, in a certain way he becomes a zivug with God, and he does not see God outside, even though God technically is considered outside of him, but he will not feel the disempowerment that comes from that feeling, because he will feel like he's part of God, as a person feels when he loves another. When one person really loves another, he feels in a certain sense that he is one with the other, and the fact that they are separate does not disturb him. So the way to solve the problem of Nam Sufa is by obtaining this incredible love of God, and therefore like he is part of God. That's what loving means. So the midas hadin, the attribute of justice, is very simple. If he can fix this problem, Nam Sufa, by performing mitzvahs, out of love for God, he will correct that problem and he will go to Olam Haba. But if he doesn't correct it in a way, he maintains that he's a duality and therefore feels disempowered in his own way, he will have to go out of existence. He will return to God as some kind of energy, and he will be canceled as a human being. So this duality is the duality of the result according to the attribute of justice, and therefore it's in contradiction to the attribute of chesed, the attribute of love. Both attributes attempt to gain what they feel is true. Chesed attempts to gain the eternal existence of the Zulosoi, because chesed is God loving the Zulosoi. God is like a father. We tend to think of God as a God, and therefore we have a certain awe, tremendous awe. But God is really a father. He created us, and he is our father. And God, in a certain sense, loves us in a tremendous way. You see it. But God only has to initiate the attribute of justice in order to correct the flaw of Nam Mitzufa. So what is to be done by this conflict in Chesed and Din? Well, the two of them fundamentally sit down. Let's say they're represented by two different angels. There's an angel that represents the act of Chesed, or love. There's the angel which represents the act of truth, which is justice. And they sit down together at the same table and they say, let's negotiate a compromise. Why? The act of Chesed says to the attribute of Din, look, what I want is I want the Zulosoi fundamentally to exist. I really want to minimize the possibility of annihilation. You know what I mean? Because love does not accept the fact that his love is annihilated. So the Chesed says, I want to prolong the existence of the Zulosoi. You, however, entertain the act of Din. Din suddenly responds, yeah, I agree with you. It would be nice to maintain the existence of the Zulosoi. But let's face it, he has a major problem with Nam Mitzufa, and unless he fixes it, he can't have Olam Haba. So therefore, it's possible to have to annihilate him. So then, Midas HaChesed says to Midas Din, I'll tell you what, I want to initiate a new possibility. This possibility is something that didn't exist with Adam Rishon. Adam Rishon, who was the first man, has a potential chelik in Olam Haba, a potential portion in the world to come. But what was that portion? He was keneged, or he was against all of Olam Haba. In other words, the whole Olam Haba and its total ability to produce the ecstasy of Adam Rishon was given to Adam Rishon. He was the one recipient with his wife, Chava, of Olam Haba. So Chesed said something to them. I propose that we break Olam Haba into madregas, levels. And if we break into one madrega, if he doesn't earn Olam Haba on the highest level, he will earn Olam Haba on the second level. And if not the second level, he will earn it on the third level. It's like, in a certain sense, like a real estate issue. You can either have a palace in real estate, or you can own a mansion, or you can own a condo, or you can own an apartment with 3 bedrooms, or one with 2 bedrooms, or one with 1 bedroom, or you can have a studio apartment. So there are many places that a person can live. So Olam Haba for Adam Rishon was at the highest level. In other words, if he would earn Olam Haba, he would acquire the highest level of Olam Haba being like a mansion. You see it. All Olam Haba was applicable to Adam Rishon. So the Midas HaChesed, we will divide Olam Haba into sections or into levels. So therefore, if Adam Rishon sins, if he doesn't correct Nam Mitzufa, okay, so the only the only conditionality would be that he wouldn't be earning the top level of Olam Haba, but he will be earning a second level, or if not that, a third level. So therefore, we will go down to as many levels as possible to ensure that he gets Olam Haba. So the Midas Hadin, the attribute of justice, said, okay, I go along with that. But each level has to be earned by doing mitzvahs and him loving God. In other words, I will not agree to a situation where Adam Rishon does not have to do anything. That's your situation from Chesed. But I maintain that a certain effort has to be made by the Zulasoi to earn Olam Haba and to be worthy of it. So therefore, we will compromise. We will make Olam Haba into many levels, so that if he can't make one level, he will earn the second level and the third level, and so on. But each level of that, each level he has to earn. In other words, I will reduce conditionality not to his existence. I will not demand that if he fails to fix himself, he fails to fix the duality. I will not demand that he be annihilated and return to God. I will not do so. I will allow him to get a second portion or a third portion. But each portion that he has to acquire in lieu of the one he lost, he has to earn that. So therefore, he has to earn every level which he acquires, even the third one, the fourth or fifth, and the 10,000th level. It doesn't make a difference. Any level which is given to Adam Rishon has to be earned. And the Mitzvah Chesed said, okay, I go along with that. Because by making Olam Haba into many levels, it almost guarantees that he's going to go to Olam Haba on one level or another. Okay, and they signed the agreement, and the agreement came out to be a third attribute. And what is this attribute? This is the attribute which allows Adam Rishon to survive a sin. In other words, even if Adam Rishon sins, he will not be annihilated. The Zulasai will survive the consequence of din. But what will be taken away from him will be a certain level of Olam Haba, which he will not earn. So therefore, the Midas Hadin said, I agree with this. In other words, I will not take basically the life, the existence of the Zulasai if he sins, but I will allow him to go down to another level, which he then can earn again. And if not, he doesn't earn that level, I will allow him to go down to another level in which he can earn again. So they both agree on this thing, and a new attribute is formed. And that attribute is called the Midas Harachamim, the attribute of compassion or mercy. So the two fundamental attributes themselves, which emanate from God, is the attribute of love, which is called chesed, and the attribute of din, which is called justice. The third attribute, which is the attribute of mercy or compassion, is an attribute which allows the Zulasai to survive even if he sins, but which it confiscates a certain portion of Olam Haba. So what's not confiscated is the existence of the Zulasai itself, but what's compromised is the portion of the Olam Haba that the Zulasai can earn. But he has to earn any portion in which he becomes possible. So this new attribute is called the attribute of Rachamim, or mercy. It's an attribute which is composed of the compromise between the attribute of chesed, love, and the attribute of din, justice. So we suddenly have a thing like this where we suddenly begin to understand this. Now, what the attribute of justice does, it does not annihilate the person who does a sin. It does not do that. What it does is the Midas HaChesed is able to block, or I should say the Midas HaRachmim. The Midas HaRachmim, what does it actually do? How does it save really a person from annihilation? Well, what it does is it takes the energy of din, which surrounds the person to annihilate him, and it suspends that energy. That's right, that's the main thing that it does. It saves the Zulasai, or the person who receives Olam Haba, by blocking or suspending the energy of justice, which wants to annihilate him if he does a sin. So all it does is suspend the energy. In other words, it holds it in abeyance. The attribute of justice functions, but it cannot affect the existence of the Zulasai because it's being suspended, or it's being suspended by the attribute of mercy. But the attribute of mercy is able to not only suspend the attribute of din, which is its main power, but it's able to provide the person who sins with a new chelik in Olam Haba, because it divides Olam Haba into many different levels, which was not the fact when Olam Haba was created. So since it provides many levels in which it's possible to earn Olam Haba, even if a person sins, he simply goes down to a lower level. So this is really what the attribute of mercy does. It does two things. It immediately interferes with the attribute of justice and does not allow the attribute of justice to annihilate the person, because he did a sin and he was not able to correct the problem of Dam L'Sufa. And second, after suspending the attribute of din, so the attribute of din does not affect the Zulasai, it allows the attribute of din to affect the portion in the world to come that the person lost. In other words, that portion in which he should have gained, but now lost because of a sin, goes down to a new level which is much lower. So therefore, the person is not annihilated, but his portion in Olam Haba is annihilated. That portion which he was supposed to get beforehand, before the sin, is now annihilated, and the person becomes vulnerable to a new portion in Olam Haba. And therefore, the attribute of mercy has created or divided Olam Haba into many levels or many portions. So we fundamentally now understand the basic function of Chesed and Din, and we made a compromise called Rachamim. And we now understand how these three attributes function. Now, fundamentally, we have to ask ourselves, well, how does it do that? What is the mechanism in which Chesed is able to block Din and cause Olam Haba to be in a new level? How does the Midas HaRachmim actually work? We understand what it does, but how does it do it? That's the question. What is the mechanism of the Midas HaRachmim? Well, the mechanism of the Midas HaRachmim concerns the Shekhinah itself. Because what happens? What happens when you lower the level of Olam Haba? What do you have to do to lower the level of Olam Haba that a person gets? Well, you have to do really two things. And this comes along with the old action of the attribute of mercy. It does really two things. The fundamental thing, what it does, it says like this, and this is the fundamental principle of the attribute of justice, which unfortunately many people don't know. But what it does is something like this. It says to the Zerosai, because you are not worthy of reaching the highest level of Olam Haba, I will now let you become worthy of earning a lower level of Olam Haba. But in order to do that, I have to take away a certain amount of your free will. You see, a person was given free will. The Zerosai is given the free will to do the mitzvahs. But when he's given the free will, he's given a free will to do mitzvahs, but he's given the free will to do all the mitzvahs, 630 mitzvahs, and he's able to do that. But what happens if he starts to sin and he starts to tamper with his level? So therefore he goes down a level, which means what's really going on, he begins to lose his free will, or the totality of his free will. This is a very deep concept. A person was created with free will, but he was created with free will to do the 630 commandments. Technically speaking, no one has the free will just like this. A person does not have free will, and so on. But many people don't understand this. A person is given only free will to do the mitzvahs. In other words, for the possibility of doing the commandments in the Torah, which is 613, he has the full free will to do those 630 commandments. He does not have free will when it comes to any other activity, although it may seem this way. A person feels that he has free will in terms of all of his actions, but that's only an illusion, because he's not told or is not aware of the fact that he lost some free will. A person cannot tell how much free will he has. But the fact of the matter is, the Midas Hadin, or the attribute of justice, begins to confiscate his free will. So therefore now he cannot do 630 commandments. Now he can do much fewer commandments. Let's say he can only do 500. So he has the free will to do 5 of the commandments if he wants to or not. He does not have the free will to do 630 commandments. So therefore God reduces his level in Olam Haba. How? By reducing the amount of free will that he possesses. Free will is only associated with the mitzvahs. That's all. A person does not have free will otherwise. And what God does by the mitzvah of rachamim, if a person sins, he says, I have given you the free will to do all of the mitzvahs, but now that you are beginning to sin and you don't do the mitzvahs, therefore I will now only give you free will to do fewer mitzvahs than were done before. You see it. This is how he saves a person, because he confiscates the act of free will in the totality in which he had it before. Well, so what becomes a person? He is reduced in stature. The main way the midas harachamim reduces a person from one level to another is he reduces the stature of a person of the zelosoi in terms of his ability to perform free will. Now, for the second level of Olam Haba, he has to earn it. So therefore, he has free will with fewer mitzvahs. And if he does the fewer mitzvahs, he's able to earn that level of Olam Haba. But he cannot earn the higher level because he no longer has the free will to do that. So the question now is, we see what Rachmim does. We see what's happening to the person. Most people don't understand this. Every time a person comes back, in a certain sense, is reincarnated, he comes back in a different life, and he comes back with a lower level of free will than he had in the life before. This is not a total rule. Sometimes a person comes back with the free will that he had in the life before, but this is the exception. Generally speaking, when a person is reincarnated, and in that case he comes back and he becomes a physical human being with a lower level of free will. You see it? And so, because he has a lower level of possibility of gaining Olam Haba. So the question is exactly, what does the person do then? How do you lower the level of free will? Well, you lower it in two ways. One, because the generation which he comes back in reincarnation is a lower level. In other words, there's a much greater level of darkness. That's right. God is making the second generation, which he comes back, much darker than the first. So therefore, because it's dark, the person doesn't know what's true or not. The truth of the Torah and the truth of God it becomes smaller. It's minimized. So the person doesn't have a total consciousness of God anymore, and therefore he cannot do the 613 commandments. He has a lower level of the consciousness of God, and therefore he has a lower level in his ability to mitzvahs. So in other words, what we're trying to achieve is this. The person is responsible. Every person is responsible for doing sins and for doing mitzvahs. He is responsible because he is the agent who does the mitzvahs. But even though he's responsible because he does either sins or mitzvahs, he is not accountable. There's a difference between the level of responsibility that a person has, because he is the agent who does the mitzvahs or does the sins, and the level of accountability. Accountability is different. Responsibility means he does the sins, but accountability means is he accountable? Can you hold him in front of a court of law and say, because you have done these sins, you are guilty? Can you direct an accusation against a person of guilt when the person is in a state of darkness and doesn't even know that he's guilty? In other words, the person has much less knowledge. He doesn't have the knowledge to know that what he's done is false and not guilty. He is said to be unaccountable. And in other words, what God is doing is given, in a certain sense, the insanity plea. The inability to be accountable in certain ways is similar to the legal entity called the insanity plea. What exactly is the insanity plea? It's when the person suddenly is diminished in status and he really doesn't know what he's doing, so he is said to be insane. Insanity means the person doesn't have a mind, a self-awareness that he had before, and he therefore no longer has his full capacity in terms of what he's doing. So therefore the person is said to be insane, technically, and therefore he has no sense of guilt. You cannot accuse a person who does not know the law, is completely ignorant of the law, because he's in a certain rule of darkness, and you cannot ascribe him to be guilty. That's what it means. So therefore, every generation in human history is a continuous reduction in free will. And I will explain this in a minute. if you look at all of human history from Adam Rishon till today, you will see what's called a continuous Yerida. God is minimizing the mitzvahs. It starts off with Adam Rishon, who has the full capacity of the Tariq mitzvahs incorporated in one mitzvah, which is not to eat from the Eitz Hadat, overall, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That one mitzvah, which was given to Adam Rishon, contained in its interior all the mitzvahs in Torah. So therefore, Adam Rishon, in a certain sense, by doing this one mitzvah of not eating from the Eitz Hadat, Torah, the tree of knowledge of good or evil, he was in actuality performing all 613 mitzvahs. By performing this one mitzvah. But as history goes on, suddenly the mitzvahs become less and less and less. So when we look at human history, we see a continuous reduction in the person's ability to do mitzvahs. In other words, he's gradually beginning to incorporate the state of insanity or legal insanity where he's not accountable anymore. Because the ability to obtain the knowledge of the mitzvahs is reduced. Whereas in the previous situation, a person can obtain the full knowledge of all the mitzvahs, or whatever mitzvahs he has acquired, he can obtain the full knowledge of those mitzvahs. But God suddenly makes the world darker. It makes the cultures of the world darker, and he cannot obtain the information required to do the mitzvahs. So therefore, he's not responsible for the mitzvahs, or I should say, he is responsible for the sins because he's doing them, but he's not accountable because he can't be considered guilty. So this is what God does throughout human history. This is the fundamental rule of God's behavior. Most people do not know this. The difference between one generation and a previous generation is the amount of free will that the Jews possess in that time, or even the Gentiles. They possess only the awareness of the number of mitzvahs that's germane to that time. They are on a lower level of mitzvahs, and therefore they lose their ability to acquire the full level of Olam Haba. They go down one level after another. Why? Because their knowledge of what the mitzvahs are or how to do them is no more. For example, there are 39 categories of mitzvahs that have to do with Shabbos. They're called the 39 malachas of Shabbos, and it's prohibited to do the 39 malachas. But for example, what was known was each of these 39 categories has an addition, as a subdivision of 39 categories. In other words, the 39 categories of the prohibitions of work on Shabbos is called the Ovos. They are called major categories. But each category of each act, each operation has itself 39 categories, which are derivatives, and they are called Todos. And it says that even though every category of the 39 categories of Shabbos used to have 39 subcategories of Shabbos, we no longer know them. They're not in the Gemara. We no longer know what these 39 categories are. Why don't we know them anymore? Because God took away that information so that when we sin on these categories, it's not a sin. In other words, God gave us a certain level of insanity and a certain level of ignorance. God increases the ignorance of the Jewish people each generation. Every generation from Adam Rishon down to us, down to our generation, is a lower generation than the generation before. It knows less of the mitzvahs. It knows less of the details, which allows the person to have a higher level of Olam Haba. Now he only simply acquires a lower level of Olam Haba because he's less of a knowledge of what mitzvahs he has to do. So this is fundamentally how God the Father saves his children. God is a God. He created the universe and everything in it. But God is also a father. He's really a tata. He's a father. And he loves his children. And he wants to be with them in Olam Haba. So therefore, he doesn't want to annihilate them. He does not want to see them suddenly disappear because of his love for them. So therefore, he continuously creates new levels in Olam Haba. So they will acquire a low level and a lower level of Olam Haba. But at least they will survive to see Olam Haba. He does this by minimizing or reducing the amount of knowledge each generation obtains. So now this generation knows less of this knowledge, and therefore it's not guilty, it's not accountable. And that's how God saves his children, or in this case, how he saves the Jewish people who are essentially his children. God also saved the Goyim in a certain way, but I'm not going to talk about that now. But the Jewish people are definitely the children of God. You know, they are the children, they're the firstborn of God. And God has every intention of saving them, even though they sin more and more and more. So this is what human history is nothing more the gradual reduction in the knowledge of the Zulasoi in terms of the mitzvahs that he has to do to earn Olam Haba. If he can't make it in one sense, he'll make it on another level, and another level, and another level. But each level requires a different level of knowledge, a lower level of knowledge. So therefore, he's not accountable for the thing. It's very important that you understand this concept of the reduction of free will, that actually the neshama of each person is reduced, and because it's reduced in its level of intensity of spirituality, it has less of a free will the second time when it had the first time. And therefore, since it has less of a free will, it's capable of doing less mitzvahs, and therefore sins more. But those sins that it does, it doesn't know that it's even sinful, and so on. So we have to examine history. History is nothing more than the progressive operation or the progressive application of the attribute of mercy, so that throughout human history, all the levels of Olam Haba that will be created are now applicable to the Jewish people. There are some who earn a high level, and there are many who earn intermediate levels, and there are a lot of Jews who earn lower levels. But every Jew fundamentally God is going to attempt to save, and so on, and will not be annihilated at all from the Midas Hadin. So, therefore, between the compromise between the Midas HaChesed love and the Midas Hadin justice, there was a tremendous concession by the two of them. The Midas HaChesed conceded in the sense that every level has to be acquired through an effort of mitzvahs. The Midas Hadin conceded that he would never annihilate, basically, the Zulasa. He would not annihilate him, but he would annihilate the level of Olam Haba that you could have earned. So this progressive cycle continues throughout human history, because souls are reincarnated in every generation, and they are reincarnated, generally speaking, at lower and lower levels, which means that each level that goes down, every generation in human history is considered like a lower level than the generation before, and all the souls of that generation are on a lower level, at least most of the souls are on a lower level than they were before. So that generation has to have a greater degree of darkness. It also has to have a greater degree of suffering. So mankind has to continue to suffer to atone for the fact that he sins. So since he suffers and since he's in darkness, he is considered fundamentally unaccountable for all the sins that he did in the previous generations. And that's the mechanic, that's the dynamic of human history. Human history, unlike the historians, the secular historians think, human history does not simply continue on by itself. It is governed by God, so that each generation is each generation becomes a lower generation where there's more unaccountability, where the souls are smaller and they have less free will. And that's fundamentally the dynamic or the mechanics of how the attribute of mercy functions. This is a very critical concept, and this explains human history. Because mankind throughout human history differed. He changed. You see, we think that men were always the same fundamentally. We think that mankind was uniform, but he was not. This was not what mankind was. Mankind was very different at the beginning than he is at the end. And now I'll discuss basically the macro periods of human history, and I'll illustrate this. The first period of mankind was biblical. That was the generation in the Torah, the generation of Adam and the generation of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the patriarch, the generation of Moshe Rabbeinu and the Jews in the desert. These generations were all biblical, meaning that they were all capable of prophecy. Now, most people think that the prophets only numbered about 25 or 26. after the books that are named after them, like the prophet Isaiah, Yeshaya, the prophet of Yechezkel, Ezekiel. We think that because there were about 24, 25 books of the Torah that were written prophetically, where they were in direct contact with God, they were prophets. But the fact of the matter is that's not true at all. In the biblical period, they say, from the time of the whole tenure of the first Beis Hamikdash, which lasted 400 and something years. It says the first Beis Hamikdash was around for 400 years, at least 410 years, or 400 and so on and so forth. And during that period of time, the Gemara says, the Talmud says, there were 1 million prophets. That's right. It's astounding. There were over 1 million Jews that had the gift of prophecy. They suddenly went to sleep, they went into a trance, and they were able to communicate with God, where God showed them what the future would look like. That's right. How many prophets were there? 1 million. That's right. Prophecy was not so much a gift. Prophecy was a state of spirituality that used to be earned by Jews. If you acquired a very high state of spirituality in your time, you would become a prophet. It was not a random gift given by God. God gave you prophecy because you were something special. No, it was a state of spirituality. If you achieved that state of spirituality, you would become a prophet. So therefore, prophecy was normative. It was normal. It was not exceptional, because then over 1 million Jews would not have become prophets. So therefore, we see that the madrego, the level of mankind at the beginning of history, from Adam until Purim, the holiday of Purim, they were all prophets. And therefore, when they saw miracles, they saw open miracles. God did not disguise or did not conceal his ability to perform miracles. So the Jews in Egypt and the patriarchs all saw miracles. The 10 plagues, for example, and the splitting of the sea were all miracles that were witnessed by the Jewish people. And there were many other miracles in the time of the prophets also that were witnessed. For example, Joshua held back the sun. The sun stopped in its motion so that he can finish the war with certain Goyish nations. So there were still many miracles that were done after, until the year approximately 586 BCE. 586 before the Common Era, there was an era of people being prophets and people capable of seeing open miracles from God. But after that time, after 586 BC, when the temple was destroyed and the Jews went from Babylonia to Persia, then a new era, it was called the prophecy of the sages. The age of prophecy ended and existed for thousands of years. And people knew that a prophet was a normal guy. But in 586, when the temple was destroyed, BCE, when the temple was destroyed, there were no more prophets. Malachi was the last prophet. After him, prophecy decreased and disappeared amongst the Jewish people. And then a new level was obtained, which is called the sages. And all the people of that time, most of the people were sages. Those people who wrote the Gemara because who lived at that time. They lived at the time from 586 BCE. They lived at the time until 400. Approximately 450 years ACE, after the Common Era. So for approximately 1,000 years, the Jews went into a whole different level. So the Jews who were in the level when the temple was destroyed, the first temple, and then and so on, as long as that was around for 1,000 years, all the Jews at that time could be prophets. And after that, the second level of the Jewish people was in the level of sages. They were no longer prophets, but they were sages. So this shows you the difference between a biblical Jew who lived before the destruction of the temple and a Jew who lived after the temple was rebuilt. The second temple that was rebuilt was a different Jew. He had a different level of free will. That's right. Because the second temple was not like the first temple. And then when finally the second temple was destroyed by the Romans, all the Jews again changed. They were on a different level of unaccountability, right? because God wanted to save them. So he kept on reducing the level of Kedusha, of holiness that the Jews obtained, because he wanted to save them as a father wants to save his children. So this was the second level, the first level being biblical man, and the second level being a sage, man as a chochem, as a sage. And after that, there was a third level. The third level was no more sages, but that's called the level of the Goinim and the level of the Rishonim. They have a different name. The third period of Jewish scholarship was called the Gaonim. Every one of them was a Gaon, a genius, in terms of the knowledge of the Talmud. The basic study of Torah was done in the knowledge of the Talmud. And the people who specialized in this were called Gaonim. And later on, in the year 1000 ACE, was the level of the Rishonim. That these were called the first ones, the Rishonim. They were very great scholars in Talmud. But their study was confined to the Talmud. They did not have the same studies as the people who were sages, who were Tanoim Amorim. There was a different type of learning, and I'm not going to go into this. But we see that mankind throughout its history, the Jewish people at least, throughout their history, kept on being reduced. They kept on being reduced in their knowledge, and they kept on being reduced, not really reduced, but they kept on suffering. And the era of Christianity started fundamentally by the period, slightly from the period of the sages. Christianity started in the Common Era, which was by the person they worshipped, who himself was an Orthodox Jew, but they worshipped him as a god, by the Council of Nicaea in approximately 330 ACE. And from then on, they all became different, and so on. And finally, they became Goinim and then Rishonim. And the final era of the Jews, which is the era that we are now, are called the period of the Acharonim. But all of these periods, the biblical man, the sages, the Goinim, the Rishonim, and the Acharonim, each of these phases is a phase in human history where the Jewish people in each phase was less than in Kedusha and holiness and spirituality than the generation before. So how is this possible? Because God was reducing the souls of the Jewish people so that even though they sin, they could still go to Olam Haba on a lower level. And this is fundamentally the process. So that today, we are on the lowest level possible. What level are we on today? We are on a level called a subhuman in a certain sense now. Why? Because when the Jews are on the highest level, they are called an Adam, a man. The word man in Hebrew symbolizes a person who is highly spiritual, who is fundamentally biblical man. And the word Adam is also used to talk about people who are also in a sage. But after that, the levels even reduce further. The accountability of the Jews become, the unaccountability, I should say, reduce further and further. So that mankind right now, in the last 100 years, is called subhuman. In the Torah, it's called subhuman. What do you mean? Because in our time, for the last 100 years, since the invention of Reformed and Conservative Judaism, most Jews today do not keep the Torah at all. They don't keep the Torah not because they don't want to keep the Torah. They don't keep the Torah because they have no knowledge of the commandments of the Torah. For example, the Jews who were in Russia during the period of communism, they barely knew that they were Jewish. The communist government saw to it that there would be no knowledge of Torah at all, no biblical knowledge. So all the Jews that were born in Russia in the last 100 years were under the rule of communism. And therefore they had no ability to gain any knowledge of Judaism. So therefore, what do we say about them? They never kept Shabbos, they never kept Kashrus, they never kept most of the mitzvahs. So therefore, they're considered unaccountable. They considered this is the insanity plea for the Jews who lived in Russia and the Russian states at that time. So we see today 91% of the Jewish people are not even religious. They have no knowledge of Shabbos or no knowledge of any Yom Tovim. They have no knowledge of any of the mitzvahs, of kashrus, anything. And it's not that they don't want to keep it. They don't know anything about it. They never went to yeshiva. They never learned Torah at all. They were brought up by parents who are not religious at all. So a Jew who fundamentally does not know any mitzvahs and therefore cannot do any mitzvahs is called a tinok shonishba. It's equivalent to a baby who was captured by the Gentiles, by the Goyim, and he lived among the Goyim most of his life. So that Jew does not learn Torah and doesn't know anything about the mitzvahs. Why does God put a Jew into that category? Why did God put 6 million Jews into Russia and they will be affected by communism on which they would not learn any Torah and not even know? The only reason why those Jews even knew they were Jews is because it said on an ID card, Ivritskaya, that means Jewish. Otherwise, many of them would not even know they're Jewish. Why does God do this? What's the principle that governs his actions in that way? And as I told you, the principle that governs his actions is that he's the father that wants to save his kids. And he sees Jews throughout many generations that never kept anything. So finally he returns them in a level of reincarnation where they don't know almost all the mitzvahs that have to do between man and God. So therefore they are considered unaccountable because these Jews will go to Olam Haba. They will have a portion into Olam Haba, but they will have very low portions. Olam Haba is divided into many levels, thousands and thousands and thousands of levels, to accommodate many Jews who will sink to those levels because they will not do mitzvahs, they will do sins. So God therefore reassigns them, he brings them back, he reincarnates them. And in the act of reincarnation, he lowers their free will so they don't know anything anymore, or they know very little. So this is human history. In our time, we have a level where we're almost considered subhuman, because an Adam, a person who does not know any mitzvahs at all, is considered sub-Adam or subhuman. So therefore, this is like the last generation. This generation will earn Olam Haba on the lowest levels possible because of all the sins that they did, the inability to perform mitzvahs in all the times when they existed on the planet Earth in a reincarnated state. This is their final state. And this is one reason why the Mashiach doesn't come. Excuse me. This is one reason what?
Someone mute that phone. Someone's phone is on. Mute that phone. Mute.
Someone please mute their phone. So therefore we see the cycle in which God moves human history from an area of full ability, full accountability, to an area of less accountability, and final, almost no accountability. But there has to be some level of accountability. So even though these people do not know any of the commandments that have to do between man and God, they don't know anything about kashrus, they don't know anything about Shabbos or anything like that, they still know mitzvahs that have to do between man and man, and they are still accountable for those mitzvahs. In other words, stealing from another person, saying lashon hara, speaking bad about another person. These are mitzvahs which are based on logic and which are based on the behavior between man and man, one Jew to another. And these mitzvahs, they are still accountable. So therefore, God has fundamentally almost confiscated all the mitzvahs that have to do with him and the Jewish people together, and he has simply allowed to remain all those mitzvahs that have to do with between man and man, because those mitzvahs are still in a logical format, and every Jew should know that, whether he went to yeshiva or not. Every Jew has to know about the mitzvah of lashon hara, speaking ill of another person, even though he didn't learn it in the Torah, because that's fundamentally what a human being should do. He has to respect the dignity of each person and not badmouth them automatically so that he can talk about other people. He would know automatically that he's sinning, and therefore God still holds him accountable. So therefore, even though 91% of the people on earth, the Jews on earth, no longer keep any of the mitzvahs that have to do between man and God, so therefore God holds them unaccountable in terms of those mitzvahs. They still are held accountable. They are still held accountable on the mitzvahs that have to do with man and man. So therefore we see the cycle. We now understand in a very deep way at least to some extent, that I'm able to explain the process of history as it goes on. Now, what's the mechanics of this? What produces the darkness? How is it that the generations, each one coming after another, become darker and darker in terms of spirituality? Even though we notice that the generations become more and more intellectual and more intelligent, like the scientific revolution started about 700 years ago, and so on. So therefore, we find mankind is becoming more intelligent, yes, but only intelligent in terms of physicality, in terms of the physical universe. Mankind is becoming worse spirituality. This century is perhaps the worst century of all. World War I and World War II. Continuous man is at war, and therefore mankind is terrible in terms of his ability to exercise his relationship with other people. And this is because this is the lowest generation of human beings, and it's the lowest generation of Jews also, because God in the end wants to save almost every Jew, and he wants to save many Goyim. I know it's hard to believe, but there are many Goyim he does want to save because they are moral. If the Goyim keeps the 7 mitzvahs of Noah, God will restore to that person Olam Haba on a lower level, but Olam Haba nevertheless. Because God not only loves the Jews, but God is the Father of all people, and God loves all of mankind. So anyone who is worthy, any Gentile who is worthy because he performs the 7 mitzvahs of Ben Noach, you see, who performs mitzvahs between man and man, he will go to Olam Haba, even though it's a low level of Olam Haba, but he will be also guaranteed Olam Haba. Because God said to Abraham, and in you will be blessed all the nations of the world. When God made the Jewish people at Sinai, in a certain sense Jewish, he did not mean to exclude mankind. Mankind still retained the possibility of residing in Olam Haba. But of course, they have to also go through reincarnations and so on and so forth, and mankind also reduces their free will. But I will not discuss these things. These are very deep things, and we'll discuss these things in another share. So this is fundamentally the journey. History is the journey to the reduction of the power, spiritual power of a human being. It's a journey which makes people considered insane. It's a journey which reduces the soul's ability to have free will. And therefore it's a journey which gradually lowers the level of Olam Haba with each succeeding generation. But what's the mechanics of this? How does this actually perform? That's the question. So the answer to this is, it's a very deep question, and this has to do with the rest of our share, actually. The energy of God as it's manifest in the physical universe is called the Shekhinah. The word Shekhinah comes from the word Shochen, to dwell, to reside by. So the energy of God that resides amongst human beings is called the Shekhinah, and that's the energy which gradually is affected by the sins of mankind. When mankind keeps on sinning, all of them, when all of mankind keeps on sinning, especially the Jews, particularly the Jews, then what happens is the Shekhinah, the energy of the manifestation of God, goes into what's called exile, Golus. And that's really a period of tremendous darkness. It goes into the exile of the evil forces that surround the universe. There are evil entities surround the universe, especially those entities that have to do with the angels of justice. And the Shekhinah goes into the capture, is captured by these angels of justice in a certain way. I'm not going to explore this thing right now, but they're captured by the angel of justice and the angels that come from justice, which are called Zoyamah. And they are captured by the Shekhinah, and therefore when they capture the Shekhinah, the power of the Shekhinah to reveal itself to mankind is lowered. When the Shekhinah reveals itself to mankind, when it's completely open, when it has a certain awe, a certain light that shines on mankind, then mankind is blessed. He is blessed with shalom, with peace. He is blessed with prosperity, and so on and so forth, and blessed with health. all the blessings come to mankind when the Shekhinah, which is the energy of God, which is associated with mankind, is open and free. Then the Shekhinah is able to give all the energy of God to the people of the world. And mankind is in a state of blessedness. But when mankind is in a state where he's continuously being reduced in free will, then the Shekhinah, in a sense, goes into Golus. And when it goes into Golus, it goes into a darkness. And that's what reduces mankind to a state of darkness and suffering. The deeper the Shekhinah goes into Golus or exile, the deeper the Shekhinah is completely surrounded by the evil forces, the less it's light. The less it's light to go to the Jewish people and to all the world, so mankind looks terrible, and so on and so forth. So the fundamental mechanism which produces the darkness, which takes away the free will of mankind and the ability to do mitzvahs, is really when the Shekhinah, the energy of God as manifest in the physical universe, goes into exile. It says to go into Golus. And when it goes into Golus, the Mashiach cannot come, because the Mashiach goes into Golus with the Shekhinah. It's a very great fact, and I just want to say this one fact about the Mashiach himself. Most people have no idea what the Mashiach will do when he comes. You see it? But the Mashiach is a special person who actually participates in the suffering of the Shekhinah. At the beginning of creation, before God created the world, God spoke to a certain soul, which is the highest soul of them all. And he said, I have to suspend the attribute of justice, because if I don't suspend it, it will destroy mankind because of the sins. So therefore, I have to suspend the attribute of justice. And the only way I can suspend the attribute of justice is if you, the soul of the Mashiach, participate with me, God, in terms of suffering for them. So therefore, not only will the Shekhinah, the energy of God, go into the dark side, or the capture among the evil forces, but also you also have to go into the Golus with me. You will be in the exile just like the Shekhinah will be in the exile. And you two together, in the fact that you are in exile amongst the forces of evil, which are created by the sins of mankind, you both will uphold mankind so it will not be destroyed. So that's why the Shekhinah doesn't come. That's why the Mashiach doesn't come. Why hasn't the Jewish people been worthy of the Messianic period? Well, that's because the Mashiach is not available. And where is the Mashiach? The Mashiach is the same place where the Shekhinah is. He is in the dark forces. He is captured in the dark forces, and it said that he is in Golus. And while the Shekhinah is in Golus in exile, like the Shekhinah is with him, and he is in exile, he can't break out, and therefore he can't come. That's why we are almost at the end of human history, and we don't see anyone by the name of the Mashiach. He has not appeared yet. So what is God waiting for? When will God release the Mashiach and the Shekhinah from the dark side? Well, now we understand why the Shekhinah has to go into the dark side. Why? Because that's what reduces the Jewish people in their free will. That's where they descend from one level to another in Olam Haba. It's because the Shekhinah is in Golus and in exile that produces the darkness and suffering that's required to go from one level to another. Now the Jewish people will finally go to the last level. Now we don't know when this last level is. God has not revealed it to the Jewish people. Only two people knew when this level was. Jacob, Yaakov Avinu, the patriarch, and Daniel, the prophet. Those are the only two people who had the knowledge of when that time would be. When would God suddenly free the Shekhinah or his energy from the dark side so it will become available to the Jewish people and to the peoples of the world? And when will he stop the darkness and the suffering? When will the descent, the gradual descent of this whole thing, when will it stop? Well, it stops when the Shekhinah and the Mashiach go out of Golus, out of exile. And when they go out of exile into the light, that light will become available to all of mankind, and mankind will see the actual appearance of the Shekhinah, and they will see the appearance of the Mashiach, who will start the Messianic period. Now, we are finally up to the last period of human history. And this in some way has to do with what's happening now. We said before, and so on and so forth, that in our age, we are at almost the end of Jewish history. The Talmud says that the physical world, will not last beyond the year 6000. And on the Jewish calendar, it is now 5,781 years. That means that there is technically only 219 years left for the existence of the physical universe. After that, the physical universe will begin to disappear and slowly become Olam Haba. Yes, the physical universe has a time limit. It only has a time limit of 6,000 years. And at the end of the year 6,000, the physical universe itself, the entire universe, will begin to become spiritual. And with the spirituality of the physical universe, it will begin to become Olam Haba. So therefore, there's only 219 years left to the physical universe. So therefore, all the people, the Jewish people that God wants to save, and all the Goyim that God wants to save, have to reach the lowest level of Olam Haba, which is available. Now, we do not know that level of Olam Haba. It's unknown to us. It was only known to two people. But it has to become available at that time. Now, the period of the Mashiach will become the last period before the physical universe disappears. And therefore, the Mashiach will appear. In fact, there are two Mashiachs. The Mashiach ben Yosef, the Mashiach, the son of Yosef, and the Mashiach ben David, the Mashiach, the son of David. And both of them have undergone suffering to allow the Jewish people to survive, even though they sin so on. But both of them will come at a certain period, which is called the Messianic period, which is a certain number of years before the end of the physical universe. The last period of the physical universe, in those last period in which the universe will remain physical and not become Olam Haba, which is totally spiritual, will be at the end of human history. And why is it the end of human history? Why hasn't the Mashiach come before? Well, the answer is because he can't. He is now trapped in a certain netherworld, in a certain darkness, so that he allows the Jewish people to survive. And I will talk more about this later on. But this is what's going on. So right now, we see we are in the darkest period before the end. The period when the Mashiach will be coming is almost imminent. It's almost imminent, that's right. How do we know it's imminent? How do we know the Mashiach is about to appear? We know it from what's happening in the world. Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, the Ramchal, once said that the Mashiach will not come before mankind is at the lowest level of spirituality. That's right. He will be at the lowest level of spirituality. And he will be at the lowest level in such a case where if he goes down one more level of reduction, that's beyond Olam Haba, and everything in the world will be annihilated. God will annihilate the world according to the attribute of justice, because the world is now at the last level of Olam Haba. There is no more levels after that. And the Mashiach must come at the lowest level and save the world. And that's exactly what will happen. So therefore, the Ramchal says, what will it look like in the world? It looked like the world will be completely turned over. The world will be such a level of darkness and war and so on and so forth has never occurred before, like in our time. In the 20th century, it's been the worst level of war and so on, and nuclear weapons and so on that we've ever seen. Mankind has the total capacity to annihilate himself. And in this generation, we see that mankind is moving in that direction. At any moment, it could be a period when suddenly China or Russia or any of the nations of the world and so on and so forth will suddenly declare war on each other. World War III is possible at any moment. And this is happening in our time. Not only that, we see that the whole world has become left. The whole world is becoming socialist and leaving. America used to be a very great country. It was a capitalist country where human rights was the main thing. The Bill of Rights, the ability of a person to sue the government for discrimination was possible. Never has this appeared in human history. And this appeared with the founding of America through the founding fathers. That's right. Before then, there were emperors and there were kings, and no one really had free will. But now, a free will as a citizen. But in our times, once America adopted the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, every American citizen had the total ability to be free and be guaranteed certain rights because he's human. And that guarantee means that he's at his highest level of human dignity. But that suddenly has been taken away. Why? Because suddenly, under the guise of racism, which is not true of America, America suddenly has become a socialist country, and it's trying to move to socialism and then eventually to communism, which is complete power to the left. Therefore, we are literally in the last phase of human history, when the world looks like it's about to disappear. It's about to suffer all the aspects of the attribute of justice. So the question is, why has mankind gone so low? He's gone so low so God could save him and make him totally unaccountable. You see it. But why do we have to go to such a low point? So what I want to say now is a very big chiddush, or a very big new concept that I've never really explained before. God is now trying to save a people. He's trying to save people who should not be saved. There's a certain category of people, category of Jews, who have no portion in the world to come. That's right. The sins that they have committed throughout human history and all their reincarnations are so great that they themselves do not have any portion in the world to come. They're so on. And these Jews are who? They're called Muslim. A Mosa is a Jew who has no affinity and no connection with the Jewish people. He considers himself like a Gentile and is completely loyal to the Gentiles in their anti-Semitic view of the Jewish people. This Jew reports other Jews to Goyim so that the Goyim can kill him or they can rob him and so on. Any Jew who is so disloyal to the Jewish people and so on, who actually is a part of the Goyim, considers himself as if he's a Goy, has no affinity to the concept of Judaism, even to those mitzvahs that have to do with man to man, considers himself like a Goy completely, and therefore it's called a Moser. A Moser is considered a person who gives over, Mesiras, to give over. He considers himself a person who can give over a Jew to the Gentiles so that they can destroy him. This Jew is separated from the Jewish people, and he has no portion of the world to come. There are now, unfortunately, millions of Jews in that category, and I'm not going to name them and say what it is, but there are a lot of Jews who've gone into that category. Jews who voted for who have voted for the left, who vote for the ability to take away everything that we have and introduce socialism, who introduce anti-Semitism in the world, Jews who are part of the system. And I'm not going to mention names. I think you can all figure out who I'm talking about. God has decided, because he's a father and actually loves his children, even these category of Muslim, even though this category of Muslim does not have an ability to persevere and become to Olam Haba, they have no portion in the world to come. God has decided to give them a portion in the world to come. And how do we know this? Because it says when Moses saved the Jews from the golden calf, the sin of the golden calf, God said to him that he's going to be using his attribute of mercy. And God described exactly what governs the attribute of mercy. God said, what does that mean? God said, I will have mercy on he who I will have mercy on, and I will have compassion on he who I will have compassion on. Now, what does this mean? God is telling us that almost there's no standard. God has taken away every standard that is required for a Jew to go Olam Haba. And he is saying, fundamentally, that God is saying, I will save almost every Jew. That's right. Even a Moser, even someone who has betrayed the Jewish people, and so on. And I will do it by creating a new category of Olam Haba. And that's what God has done. I mean, most of the people in the world have no idea that this is going on. God has created Olam Haba as a separate category, yes, that's the future world. And therefore it has many levels. It has thousands and thousands of levels so that he can preserve them by darkening their minds and they having less free will. But now he has created a new form of Olam Haba, future world. That this category is below the category of Olam Haba as we know it. What do I mean? Olam Haba, for example, Olam Haba is a category of ecstasy, of spiritual ecstasy. There's a new category of spiritual ecstasy that now he has created for these people who are Muslim, who really don't deserve any portion of the world to come. Now, what's the difference between the two categories of Olam Haba? Well, in the first category of Olam Haba, we call that visual. What do you mean visual? It means any soul in Olam Haba can experience like a movie. That for a movie, let's say, for example, Olam Haba is a movie that you're watching. Well, when you're watching a movie, you see it visually. You can see the movie visually. Now, as far as the soul is concerned, this is Olam Hazeh. This is this world, the physical world. I mean, he doesn't realize that it's really a movie taking place in front of him, but it's really a movie. But Olam Haba is like a movie which is a full ecstasy. So therefore, he is visually enjoying his residence in Olam Haba. But God is now saying, I'm going to create a new level of Olam Haba, which is not a movie, yet it's still Olam Haba. Well, if it's not a movie and you can't watch it, how can you participate in Olam Haba? So what God says, the example I give is like a projector or an oscilloscope. A projector is the instrument, is the machine that projects the movie on a screen. And therefore, the movie exists not only on the screen as a movie, visually, but exists in the projection, in the projector, electronically. So a movie has two forms of being. It exists as a visual event, and it exists as an electronic event. On the screen, it's a movie, and it's visual. You see it. But on this, in the projector of the movie, you're projecting the movie on the screen. But in the projector, the movie appears as a series of electronic signals. And therefore, Olam Haba for the Muslim who don't even deserve Olam Haba, their Olam Haba will be like projector. They will enjoy Olam Haba not visually, which is the greatest form of protection, but they will enjoy Olam Haba as an electronic ability to electronic a participant in Olam Haba. This is only a metaphor. What exactly this means, I don't know. I do not know the difference between Olam Haba visually and Olam or experientially and Olam Haba where you're experiencing non-visually, electronically. But this is what God has said. In order to save these people, the Muslim, who are the worst category of all, they have abandoned the Jewish people to a terrible destiny. But I even want to save them and so on. But to do that, I have to create a whole new category of Olam Haba, which is not visual, which is actually electronic. So therefore, you can see that by taking out an oscilloscope. An oscilloscope is an instrument which shows you the electronic signals that's present in an electronic device. And you can see it as a series of waves. That's the appearance of the electronic signals as a series of sine waves, up, down, up, down, up, down. It's a wave. So God says the Olam Haba of this category of Muslim will not be a movie. It will be a visual of the oscilloscope. So they will not see a movie. They're going to see a series of electronic signals, and that will be the lowest category of Olam Haba. And that's what God means when he said to Moses, and I will have mercy on he who will have mercy. Who was that? On whoever I choose. In other words, there is not a lowest category in which I will give Olam Haba. I will give Olam Haba to the lowest category of all. In other words, I will have mercy on who? On someone who does something? No. On someone who's simply a Jew, or perhaps in a certain sense simply a goy, because I love them. So they will be able to get, because some of the good deeds that they were able to do will be able to produce for them Olam Haba, but it will only be an electronic Olam Haba. It will not be a visual. So in that sense, God has created a whole new concept in Olam Haba. And where he said that his ability to be merciful is complete. You know, it doesn't submit to a standard. It doesn't submit to a goal. He will save who he will save. Well, that's a synthetic sentence. You know, that's saying the same thing. It doesn't say he will save all those people who are worthy or all those people who contribute to charity. It doesn't say that at all. It says, I will save whoever I will save. In other words, whoever I want. So that was the category that he told Moses of his ability to be merciful. It's the nth degree of mercy. And therefore, he wants to save the lowest level of Jews that have ever existed. He still wants to save them because God is a father, and therefore he wants to save them on some level so that they will be able to appreciate the concept of Olam Haba. Well, what does that require? I mean, if God wants to do this, what does that require? Well, we said before that in order to make darkness and suffering, God has to put the Shekhinah and the Mashiach in a category of evil. They are surrounded by evil, and it's called the exile. And as long as they are surrounded by evil, their light does not shine, and therefore they cannot bring the redemption. Well, God has decided to bring the Shekhinah in the lowest possible level of all. In order to create this new level of Olam Haba that is applicable to Jews who are Muslim, God has to create the lowest level of Olam Haba. He actually has to create a new level of Olam Haba that is not subject to a standard. He is saving them simply because he wants to save them. That's it. So that's the lowest level. So therefore the Shekhinah has to go into exile on the lowest level possible, and the Mashiach has to go there with him. That's the lowest level. So what does this mean? In actuality, the Shekhinah and the Mashiach should be out of exile. Why? Because before God wanted to save the Muslim, these people could earn Olam Haba. So therefore, the Shekhinah and the Mashiach will go into an evil category, which is commensurate with the lowest level of Olam Haba. But as far as the Olam Haba of Muslim, there is no level of Olam Haba. According to the halacha, according to the law, Muslims do not have any portion in the world to come. So that means that the Shekhinah does not have to be in exile. Technically speaking, the Shekhinah could leave. It could leave the category of exile, and so can the Mashiach. So in order to save the category of Muslim, of people who give over Jews to anti-Semitic acts and to terrible acts by the Goyim and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth, God has to therefore create a new level of Olam Haba. Well, to create a new level of Olam Haba, it means you have to go down to even a further level of terrible events in human history. So therefore, God has to go down. So therefore, the Mashiach and the Shekhinah are not compelled to go into exile. The lowest level of the Shekhinah in exile is the lowest level of Olam Haba. That darkness corresponds to the level of which God wants to save. But there's a level beyond that. That level does not exist for Olam Haba. That's a level of people who should not get Olam Haba, and that's Muslim. So therefore, God has to force the Shekhinah, and I say this, the Shekhinah should have gone out of exile, because there's no people that it has to save anymore. God wants to save the Muslim because he wants to save them. That's his father. He's the father of these children, and he wants to save them. So therefore, the Shekhinah should not be in Olam Haba because he doesn't have to go into exile to save them. So therefore, God has created a new form of exile that has never existed in all of human history. That's right. He has created a new form of exile that never existed so that he compels the Shekhinah and the Mashiach to stay in exile. He does not let them go out. In other words, even though the Shekhinah should go out of exile because it doesn't belong there, because it doesn't have a category of Jews that have to be saved, God has compelled the Shekhinah and the Mashiach to go back into exile. He forced them to go back so that they can create a darkness which they themselves can appreciate and so on. He has created a new level of Olam Haba which is applicable to these Muslims. And that means that the Shekhinah and the Mashiach will go into an exile and will be forced into exile against their will. We have never seen this in all of human history. The Shekhinah and the Mashiach have always gone into exile because God was always saving a category that is applicable to go to Olam Haba. But now that he's applying the act of mercy to a category of people that don't deserve Olam Haba, the Shekhinah does not have to go back into exile. But God says, yes, I want you to go back into exile, even though you're not equipped, you're not applicable to the exile. So God said, I'm going to force you and the Mashiach, both of you, to go back into exile against the Midas Hadin, against the attribute of justice. Why? Because the attribute of justice wants to annihilate these people. These people who are Muslim, the attribute of justice wants to annihilate because they have no portion in the world to come. So since the attribute of justice wants to annihilate them, they have nothing to do with mercy. And therefore the Shekhinah does not have to be in what? In an exile. But God is forcing a new level on the Shekhinah to go into exile because he wants to save a new level of people that should have been annihilated. So therefore the reason why the Shekhinah is in exile is because we can't even understand it, is because they are forced. It's like they are completely intimidated and completely compelled to be in exile, even though everything should pull them out. So this is what's happening. America, which is turning to the left, is a country that has never existed before. Since the Founding Fathers, there has been the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And now the leftists, the radical leftists, and all the progressives that are along with them are an evil people that are trying to what? Are trying to take over America, and they have taken over America. The latest government, which is composed of these people, has taken over the government, and they want to change America into a terrible, terrible country, a socialist or partially communist country, when they have absolute power. And that's what they're doing. And that's why they are doing these evil things and so on. Why? Because this evil is allowed, because the Shekhinah is exile. For who? For a new category of people called the Muslim. And that's why in Israel also, America is for the first time in its history suddenly turned in one election totally left. It's become a socialist government in one election. America has turned from a capitalist democratic country truly to a country which is now socialist and completely anti-capitalist country. And this was done, why? So that the Shekhinah goes in the Golas and is able, God is now working to save the Jewish people to the last category. And the same thing with Israel. Something has happened in Israel would never happen at this time. Israel has now become a totally leftist government. And even though the prime minister will be somewhat to the right, his term will end after 2 years, and it then will become totally leftist. Well, it has never happened in the last 20 years where Israel has gone to the left. The Israeli government and taking care of Jews has always been moving towards the redemption. Suddenly, the entire government has changed, and the entire government has become left. The people who run this government now are completely leftist, and I will not mention the names. They want to produce effects on the Jewish people, which they will remove the whole religion. They will be the enemy of Judaism and the enemy of its spirituality. And why has God permitted this government to come back? 20 years ago they used to rule somewhat, but now they're ruling again 20 years later. Suddenly, the whole government of Israel has turned around 180 degrees, suddenly to a completely leftist government. So what are the Jewish people facing? They're facing a completely leftist government in America and a completely leftist government in Israel. These are the only two countries that they really live, and so on. So the world has gone completely insane. Why has God allowed the world to become completely insane and jeopardizing the life of many Jews? Because God has one more category to save, and therefore that category should be annihilated, but God does not want to annihilate them. He wants to save them to a new category called the electronic category. It's not a visual category of Olam Haba. And in order to save them, he forced the Shekhinah to go into a Golas, into an exile where it shouldn't be. And he forced the Mashiach to go to a new Golas, a new exile, which shouldn't be. Why? So that there can be a new level of darkness that has never preceded, never existed. America has never become the country that it is, where there are two factions, Democrats and Republicans, who actually totally hate each other. And we are only one step away from a military civil war between the two. And why has God done this in one election? Because he is working to save his last category of Jews that require this thing so they're not annihilated. So if you want to understand why is this happening, why are the Jews in a completely different category in America? It's a total leftist government. And why the Jews are in a new category of leftist government in Israel? Why is this happening? Why has it been reversed? Why has America reversed itself from completely capitalistic democracy to a socialist entity? And why has God done this to Israel, where he's made this a leftist government and he's jeopardizing all forms of spirituality for the Jewish people? Israel will become a non-spiritual nation if the leftists continue to take over. Why has he done this? Well, because God has to put the Shekhinah back into exile with the Mashiach, so that he can create a darkness level and a suffering level which qualifies to redeem even the Moisim, even those people who should not get any portion in the world to come. So therefore, if you understand the mechanics of how God is running human history, that human history is a continuous descent in the madrega of spirituality, where we have less and less free will, so that God can save us eventually. You see, if you understand that this is the process of human history, you will understand why this happened now. But it happened now because it shouldn't have happened. According to the attribute of justice says, annihilate these people. They are over, they are finished. But God does not want to annihilate it, so he has to continue the process of human history where the Shekhinah and the Mashiach go into exile and they go into the dark side. So therefore there can be a darkness and a level of unaccountability that even applies to this category of Jew called Moisrim. And that's what's happening. So the only question left is, how long will this last? How long will God need to keep the Shekhinah in Golus, in exile, and the Mashiach in exile? How long will this calendar, how long will it continue so this new government in America and new government in Israel, new leftist governments in both cases, so how long will this go on? Well, we don't actually know, but it will not be long. Very soon, the expectation is that they will again be reversed. America will reverse itself to a total capitalistic and truly democratic system where the power of a citizen is that every citizen can sue the government. That's right. That's the power that the Constitution gives to every American citizen. And he will do the same thing for Israel. So therefore, this is the last generation, and this is good news, that this is the last generation where physicality will be dominant. And before Olam Haba, it's the last category. Because God is going to use this category to save his Muslim. And once he has done that, there's no one left to save. He has saved every Jew, almost every Jew that there is. And therefore, God does not have no one left to save. So therefore, history is not a process of descent where the spirituality becomes less and less. He doesn't have to do this anymore. So the Shekhinah and the Mashiach are released, and the Mashiach suddenly will govern the world. He will dominate, and he will become the king of the universe itself. So therefore, we only have to wait a little bit longer. I promise you that this is probably the last generation that will have to suffer in human history before the end. As soon as this generation is over, most probably, the next step is the arrival of the Mashiach and the beginning of the Messianic era.
Wow.
So fundamentally, this is the whole story from beginning to end. I've spoken about the operational category of Chesed, Din, and Rachamim, the category of the attribute of love, the attribute of justice, and the attribute of mercy, how they were formed. I have spoken about the process of human history, what God is doing in every generation in human history, down to this generation. And I've also discussed exactly what God is doing in this generation, because God is saving the last of the Jews. And with the saving of the last of the Jews, it becomes the end of human history as we know it, and the beginning of the Messianic era.
Shimon, this would somewhat the Yisoid that you said today would start explaining what the Moshe Mashiach look like. I mean, it's not the full build-up, but is that correct? I mean, the primary function of the Moshe Mashiach is to save the generation that can't get it, the Yidden that can't get it to
no. The answer is no. I have not really begun to explain the concept of Mashiach, but I've explained everything but that concept. So I am up to the concept of Mashiach. But I've explained the concept of darkness and suffering, where it comes from, what it's for, and what God is doing throughout human history. That's it. And I simply want people to understand what this generation is like. That this generation is probably the last generation. What?
But I'm saying, if you explain the function of darkness, the function of not having the ability to do mitzvah, to a certain degree, you're explaining why that. I mean, the main question is how, by shutting down Taryag, do we bring Klal so close to the Tikkun? And to a certain degree, you're addressing me, not addressing why the or of the nun is.
No, I'm sorry. I'm not. I have not spoken about what will happen when the Mashiach comes. All I'm saying is that when he comes, again, I have not said anything about what the Mashiach will do and what happens when the Shekhinah goes out of Golus. That is a very complicated picture.
All right.
What?
No, but you asked a question a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago. How, there's a question that you presented to the Shir. How does shutting down most of Taryag bring us closer to the Geula? Not what the Geula will look like, but how it would bring it closer to the Geula on a certain level.
And that's what I've explained.
Oh, that you did explain. That's what I just said. That part you did explain.
Yeah, that I did explain. I did. But I did not explain what the Yemos Mashiach will look like.
Right. The exact 2,000 years of Yemos Mashiach did not explain why it has, why it's called Yemos Mashiach. You explained how it's
I have not explained that. What the Mashiach will look like, what the generation will look like. But I've explained the processes which God has initiated through the process of Rachamim. To what extent? The final extent is that God will spare those Jews who were not even supposed to deserve to be spared. And therefore he has had to create a new Olam Haba which has never existed before. It's not a visual Olam Haba, it's an electronic Olam Haba. These people will watch Olam Haba from watching in a certain sense in our oscilloscope. They will simply be able to relate to the electronic signals, but they will not enjoy the visual signals. I've explained that process, and that's it. That's all I've explained.
Right.
Rav Shimon, sorry. Rav Shimon, how are these Mosrim earning Olam Haba? Looks like they're failing miserably.
Because in a certain sense, because they're not accountable in a certain way. They are not totally accountable for what they're doing. How God is making them totally accountable is not clear. But since God works on the principle of accountability, if you're accountable, if your sins you're accountable, it decreases your level of Olam Haba and so on. And if you're not accountable, it doesn't affect that chelik in Olam Haba. It spares you from annihilation. But exactly how God is doing that, we're not clear. We just know that it's composed of components of darkness and suffering, where the Jewish people have less and less accountability, less and less free will. What's affected mostly is free will. And at each level of reincarnation, the free will of an individual fundamentally becomes less. And that's how God is saving them and so on. So and this is what accounts for the levels you do.
I can see that. I just don't see a whole lot of earning going on, that's all.
Well, you don't see it. But that is known to God. Exactly how they do earning, they still do mitzvahs. They give charity. In a certain sense, they give charity. And the basic thing is they do charity. And some of them don't speak Lashon Hara. I don't know. I have not taken a census of what these people do. But it's a fundamental principle that you cannot earn Olam Haba by doing nothing. That is impossible. You have to correct some level of Namdik Sufa. Do you understand that? You must correct a tikkun of some level of Namdik Sufa. And if you don't correct any of it, you're finished. God will annihilate those people from Olam Haba. Now, how do they actually perform this? How do they correct some level of Namdik Sufa? We do not know exactly how God does that. You know, these people, where they come from and what they do. And I really can't answer that question, and we can't do that. But there's some mitzvahs that are still shaykh to them. They can still do. Like the level of Lashon Hara. If they don't speak Lashon Hara against each other, that's still a very big mitzvah to be able to give them Olam Haba. Just the level of Shmiras HaLashon, not speaking Lashon Hara. So even though they don't keep Shabbos, they don't keep any commandments in the Torah, any Yom Tov, don't.
These are
they're still doing
what? They're worse. These are Maestrom you're talking about, not people
I know.
Who keep Shabbos in the Shnishba. So what Michael is asking is, they didn't earn anything, and what do you mean they were Maestrom? Is what you said?
That's not true. What you're saying. Even though a person is a Meiser to Klal Yisrael, he may not be a Meiser to Jews in his category. In other words, he never becomes a Meiser for all those Jews who are not religious. He's only a Meiser against Jews who are religious. In other words, there are many, many different levels which are possible, many different exceptions to levels where in certain cases he would be accountable and in certain cases he will not be accountable. But exactly how God measures that is unknown.
Well, to his fellow Mosrim, he's not being Meiser.
Well, you don't know what that category is. We don't know what that category is. We don't know what mitzvahs these Mosrim did, which in some way can still save them for Olam Haba, according to the Midas HaRachamim, according to the most powerful level of Chasodim. That's called Chasodim. That God is still able to sustain them. That's because they almost have no free will, and they're almost at the lowest level of neshama, these people, and so on. But because of this lack of free will, they are on the lowest category of a neshama. So it's possible that even one mitzvah on that category and that level of neshama can spare the neshama for the lowest level of Olam Haba. We don't have the mathematics to really understand this.
The easy answer is that in a previous Gilgal, they may have done many good things, and then they were brought down here.
It may, but you don't need to come on to that answer. Right. I mean, you people are trying to provide an answer to save these people. That's not required. All we know is the general principle that God is trying to save almost all of his children. The only ones that he can't save, the only ones that he cannot save are Jews who are cruel, absolutely cruel. You know what I mean? And those who are responsible for many evil things in the world that can hurt people.
But Rav Shimon, it's even if these Jews don't even realize, of course, not because they're aware of the fact they're doing a mitzvah, just participating in the act itself has an effect on the Bria.
Yes, it does. But it depends on his intent. But that's not true. Because it depends on his knowledge and intent. So many of these Jews can be doing an evil thing, but they don't truly understand the evil they're doing. They don't know the full ramifications. Don't forget, in every time you do a mitzvah, that mitzvah is an action, and it's also an intent, which is in the mind. And therefore, a person can be doing a sin which he has no knowledge of its evil. So there are many, many different categories. So when a person is at the lowest level of free will, I mean, it takes very little, possibly, to save him. Because at the lowest level with a new, completely different Olam Haba, he's still possible to be saved because he's already at the lowest level of Olam Haba. He's beyond that level. We do not know how God judges the world ultimately.
No, but what I'm asking you is if a Jew, let's say, gives tzedakah, right? It has no cognizance of the fact that he's pleasing God. Has a natural desire to give tzedakah.
But it still may be able to save him. No. Because it says, even if a Jew is thinking of benefiting himself and has no intention of doing a mitzvah because God told him, that it still gets credit.
Okay, that's what I want to know. That's what I'm saying. Okay.
Yeah, that still gets credit. So you people are all trying to measure how God could save these people. You cannot measure. You do not know what a soul is. You do not know what free will is. You have no idea of all these parameters. And since we have no idea, we can't truly predict this. It's like a tornado. You can't predict how a tornado will move. You don't know it. We don't know its motion and so on. We cannot understand truly how God sees every soul from top to bottom. But we know one thing. God does not do anything with no purpose. And we know what that purpose is. You know what I mean? We know that God fundamentally is a father as well as a God. And as a father, look, someone once said a statement which is probably true. Even Jeffrey Dahmer, who was a serial killer and was a cannibal, his mother loved him. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but a mother always loves a son, no matter what that son is. And it's possible that Jeffrey Dahmer's mother loved him. I mean, I don't understand how that could be done, but we don't understand how God interfaces with souls or where souls come from. So we do not know the ultimate criteria and so on, what's going on, you know what I mean? And especially, and that's why God created a new level of Olam Haba. Because on the first level of Olam Haba, which contained all those portions where God can save a person, that was one thing. But to save these Moisim, God had to create a completely new level of Olam Haba. Now what is that? We don't know. But obviously that level of Olam Haba is adequate to save Moisim up to the worst of them. Now you want to understand this? Good luck. I don't understand this. We cannot understand how God judges the world. But at the end of time, when the Mashiach comes, he will be able to explain to you literally what the measurement, what the criteria is, what the parameter is for a soul to ultimately earn Olam Haba on an absolute level.
You're saying that even this new madreg of Olam Haba to accommodate the Mosrim, and that level, they're a Baal on that level.
Yeah, they can exist on that level
as a Baal, not like a guy who's just renting space.
Well, you look. According to the attribute of justice, you can only exist as an owner.
As a Baal,
you have to do something to. Yeah, there's a principle. In order to earn any level of Olam Haba, even the lowest level, you have to earn it. That's it. You have to masaken your Namak Sufa. You have to correct this from a Namak Sufa. Now, how much do you have to correct it? How do you correct it? We have no idea. I mean, most people don't even know what Namak Sufa is. You know, they have no idea what it means. Even the Gemara says that the masaken Namak Sufa, that in order to correct this principle of disempowerment, you have to earn it. You know what I mean? So what God knows is he knows the full parameters at the highest level and the lowest level in which that works. And therefore we know that God as a father wants to save his children, even if they're Muslim. And on some level he can ascribe to them an accountability that they're doing something which is good. It may be the lowest form of good that you know of, but still it's the lowest form that can earn them Olam Haba. That's only... What? You have problems with it?
No, I'm saying, but no, I was pointing out that for the guy, he also is masakin his level of Namak Sufa, but he doesn't own anything. You said he experiences it through a Jew.
No, he does earn it. That's not true. He owns the ability to...
Baal.
He is a Baal.
A guy?
You can... Yes.
What does he own? I mean, if he didn't, there's no halakha.
It says if he does the seven Noachide mitzvahs, he's a Baal.
Yeah.
I don't understand it.
Because he's an Eina Mitzvah. He's an Eina Mitzvah, you know. He's an Eina Mitzvah.
So what?
An
Eina Mitzvah is a Baal. Did you know an Eina Mitzvah?
Huh? Did
you know that an Eina Mitzvah is a Baal Madrega?
Yeah, okay.
It just says, listen to me.
Okay.
Godel HaMatzuvah, a person who's commanded to do a mitzvah and does it, is greater than an Eina Mitzvah, a person who's not commanded to do a mitzvah. If a woman puts on tefillin, she's an Eina Mitzvah. Does she get schar for that? Yes.
Sure.
So therefore you see that even an Eina Mitzvah, why? Because even an Eina Mitzvah is considered as having earned it. Not as much as a Mitzvah, of course, because there's a whole difference in the Yetzer Hara. A Mitzvah, somebody who's commanded to do a Mitzvah, has a much greater Yetzer Hara which defies that command than someone who's not even commanded, who just does it because he loves God, let's say. So therefore we see that even Goyim who keep the Sheva Mitzvahs earn that. They earn their level of Olam Haba. And even though it's a lower level of Olam Haba.
Right, but I'm not saying they haven't earned it. We've up until now we've always been mechalek a guy that he doesn't own what he has in Olam Haba, but he somehow or other owns it through a Jew.
Now we've always said that a Jew creates Olam Haba and a guy can occupy it, but a Jew has to create it, and that was the Pshat in V'nivruchu.
Right.
So what's the theory of Shimon is saying Pashas? You have 7 mitzvahs b'nei noach. They're mitzvah v'oitza. That's how they earn it.
No, they're not. They're not mitzvah.
They are
mitzvah in that.
They are mitzvah on the 7 mitzvahs.
They are not mitzvah. They lost that. They lost that.
No. No. It's not what Shimon's saying. Shimon is just saying.
I'm not.
Shimon's here.
Go ahead. No, I'm not saying that. David is right. All the goyim is against the mitzvahs of the Bnei Noach are considered an Ein Mitzvah. When God confiscated the 7 mitzvahs from all the nations of the world and wanted to replace it with Taryag mitzvahs, He made the Sheva mitzvahs Bnei Noach into an Ein Mitzvah category. The goyim have never been. That category has never come back as a mitzvah. It hasn't. But the goy can still earn a chelik in Olam Haba, even because, why? Because an Ein Mitzvah earns a category in Olam Haba. Even though he earns the residence of Olam Haba, he owns that contract. He has like a lease, and that's a contract. That's mitaradim. A tenant has the power to enforce a contract of his living there according to the law. So that's considered the level of ownership that a goy has in Olam Haba. But it is a certain level of ownership, even though the mitzvahs that he does is a category of Ein Mitzvah. But look, that's the whole thing in its own.
Yes, the Rambam. The Rambam says, he says that himself.
Right.
Ein Mitzvah.
So that's the shir. I hope you all enjoyed it. It's a very deep shir. I've run through all of history and so on. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Shimon. Thank you very much.
Okay. Take care.
Bye-bye.